It's strange how many of our visual tools are made to help us see things that are either very far away from us, or so small that they may as well be far away. Telescopes, microscopes, binoculars, and magnifying glasses. All these tools are very helpful, but they also have a tendency to keep our eyes focused on distant things rather than what's right in front of us. We do this a bit in our own lives, don't we? Our greatest hopes and dreams are nearly always located somewhere in the future. Great times that we've had with friends and family, or in special places, are frequently part of our memories in the past. If we're always looking forward, if we're always looking back and remembering, then what's happening now? What about this moment? There's very real value in planning ahead for the future and for holding on to cherished memories. But sometimes it can become an excuse, one we use to escape our present circumstances. After all, wonderful memories begin as present moments, and great futures are in their beginning stages as we speak. So what I'm trying to say is, instead of looking for ways to look past the place you're at right now, how about opening your eyes to see what's here, right now? Beauty is important because it plays a crucial role in making life's meaning clearer to us. And if our world is full of beautiful things, and if we also make beautiful things, think of music, paintings, and art, what does that say about us and who we are? What can we learn about life's meaning through what we see? Well, we're here now with Jill Caratini. Jill, thanks for being here. Well, Jill, we've been talking about how hard it is to see what's right in front of us sometimes, even if it's something beautiful. Why is it that beauty is so easy to miss so often?
I do think that there are times where we hear so much bad news that it does seem like the bad news outweighs the good news, or there's just so much ugliness in the world that it does almost seem to communicate that that's more real somehow than the beautiful. But other times I think that it might actually just be that our eyes have gotten used to not seeing it, that we're not as good at noticing beauty at times, that maybe it's there, but we're just not actually paying attention to it. There's a great story. A newspaper in Washington, D.C. decided to put together this experiment. They took Joshua Bell, who's actually the best violinist in the entire world. Weeks before, he had sold out an entire concert hall in Boston, and the seats went for over $100 a pop. And he took Joshua Bell and they added him to the subway system on morning rush hour in Washington, D.C., just to see if anyone would pay attention. And they didn't have him wearing the same tuxedo, but they had him play the same violin. It's actually a Stradivarius. It's a $1 million violin. They had him play with the same gusto as he did the time before in Boston, and they just wanted to see how many people actually noticed. And what they discovered was no one noticed. He played his heart out in the Washington, D.C. subway station, but everyone in the middle of their rush hours and paying attention to their cell phones just walked right past him. They said 27 people noticed of all of the people that passed him by that day, and just only noticing him briefly enough to throw a couple of quarters into his violin case. So I think sometimes that's a great illustration for how beauty is prevalent. Oftentimes it's right before our eyes, but we just aren't actually observing it. It's just so easy to be distracted and to walk past it. And one of the things I love about the Christian story is it reminds us exactly this, that there are things right in front of our eyes that we cannot see. Jesus uses the phrase, we're ever seeing but not really seeing, ever hearing but not really hearing. And when you first hear that, it kind of sounds strange, like what on earth does he mean? But we all do this every day. I hear you talk all the time and not really paying attention and that sort of thing. So it's just interesting that the Christian story is basically telling us that the kingdom is here among us, but it might be hidden to you because your eyes have been closed towards it. So what does it mean that the kingdom is like a treasure hidden in the field? It's actually the expression that he gives. I think it means that we need to open our eyes and to pay attention a little bit more to the beauty around us.
Now, a lot of us probably lead pretty busy and distracted lives. Is that so bad as long as we're enjoying those distractions?
One of the things I think is important to ask ourselves, what is the love behind the things that we love? What are the things that sort of make that enjoyment truly enjoyable to you? For instance, I'm a writer, and I know firsthand what it is to be distracted, but it's not a love for writing in and of itself. I think the love behind it is actually a love for truth, or for vision, or for honesty, and all of these things ultimately, to me, point me towards faith. I think one great illustration of this, G.K. Chesterton was a writer, told great stories. He was an amazing storyteller. And one of the things he said is even when he was a little boy, he realized that life was like a story, that life was first a story. And he recognized as a writer himself that on some real level, that meant that there had to be a storyteller. I mean, his stories didn't get written in and of themselves, by themselves. There had to be a storyteller writing them. And so he said he realized that if life was a story, then there was a storyteller. And so his love for storytelling ultimately pointed him to God.
looking at the world around us, it's hard to deny that this world is a hard place. That said, it's hard to deny that there is any beauty in the world, because it is all around us. So how would you define beauty?
One of the best definitions of beauty that I've ever heard was that beauty is to the soul as food is to the body. So in other words, beauty feeds us, it sustains the soul on some real level, the spirit, it nurtures us. And yet it's very unlike food in the sense that it's always creating in us more hunger for that beauty. It's not something that makes us feel full. You never get enough of it. You always want more when you've seen it. Recently I was worshiping with some friends, and they were all international voices, and people gathered together, and there was just this transcendent sort of experience at that moment. And so I think we can experience beauty in ways that are always creating in us a hunger for more of it. But the beauty that I'm talking about isn't always a simple beauty in this sense. It's much more profound than this, and it's not always a happy-go-lucky sort of thing. It can actually be quite haunting because of this longing that it sort of brings up. Another story that might illustrate what I'm sort of getting at here with this beauty that creates in us a depth of longing. I actually worked with a group of kids in Michigan one year, and it was an after-school program, and one of the girls didn't realize she was allergic to bees, and she got stung. And she immediately had a reaction, and she stopped breathing, and the paramedics weren't able to resuscitate her, and so she died. And I was sitting in her funeral beside a friend of hers the next week, and her friend looked at me during the funeral, and she said at one point, "It's not fair. There's a scab on her face that will never heal. There's a cut on her forehead that will never heal." And I remember thinking at the time, this was only a 12-year-old girl, but how simple that observation was, but yet deeply profound. She recognized in that little scar on her forehead, it happened, they were climbing trees or something and fallen, and she had scraped her forehead. But she recognized even in that cut that cuts are meant to be healed, that the pain of the world is meant to be made whole, that there's something inherent in us that recognizes this longing for wholeness. That's the sort of beauty that we're getting at here. And that is, thankfully, the sort of beauty that God gets at. Like when he tells us that the earth is filled with the glory of God, this is the sort of thing he wants us to see, that the world was made for wholeness. This is originally how he had created it. And so, interestingly enough, that little girl, she wouldn't necessarily have known it, but she was confessing the very thing that all of the prophets long before her had confessed. They were looking around the world, and they were seeing the broken parts and the ugly parts, and they were saying, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And that, in and of itself, is the cry of the Christian. We live in a world that has glimpses of these beautiful things around us, glimpses of the glory of God, and yet it's not quite how it's meant to be. And so that's part of the reason why there's this sense of longing that's sort of inherent in our recognition that we need wholeness, and we're created for wholeness, and that God is ultimately the one that can restore that wholeness.
Well, for the last question, I kind of wanted to pick up on something you had mentioned earlier when you talked about worshiping with others. Does beauty, in fact, have something to do with our worship then?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with our worship, in fact. And I know a lot of times we think of the kingdom, or we think of church as kind of a boring place. At least I did when I was a kid. And a lot of times we think of it as all about words, all about the creeds I'm supposed to confess, or the things I'm supposed to do, and the ways I'm supposed to act. And there is a sense that that is a part of our worship, certainly. But there's always so much more. And Jesus himself said that the kingdom of God is not in words. And I think what he means by that is that this kingdom is so much more alive than anything on a piece of paper, or a list of things that I should do or shouldn't do. Religion, the Christian religion especially in this sense, is something vibrant, a kingdom that he's inviting us to join and to participate in, and to enjoy with wholeness in that sense. A great way of looking at the story of John 11, if you take that story and look at it, Jesus is asked the exact same question by two different people. And what they discover in those two questions that are being asked, he answers them very differently. And I think that shows that we have room in this kingdom for all of us. Sometimes I think we make it smaller than it really is, but there's great room for your question exactly how you meant it. And this whole curriculum has been about asking questions, and so that's a great story to look at as a way that shows us that God not only hears our question, but answers it very personally and invites you into that kingdom in a very personal, real sense.
Thanks for being here, Jill. That was great.
Thanks, Nate.